All right, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. We're gonna wait for a few more folks to join us, but in the meantime, if you could take a moment to change your Zoom name to reflect your name and your organization, we'd really appreciate it. Allows us to know who's in the room and to follow up with you later on if we need to. So you can go to your Zoom box, go to the three little dots in the upper right-hand corner of your box. It'll open up a drop-down menu where you can choose rename, and that'll allow you to change it to your name and your organization. We somehow have enabled closed captioning for everyone, and that was a last-minute tech surprise. And so we'll see if we can change that so that only the folks who want closed captioning can put it on, but you might have to bear with at least my speech being typed out for the time being. So you never know what you're going to figure out during your tech check. We've got a pretty good critical mass here, I think, Allison. So I might hand it over to you to do our introduction.
Great, thank you. Greetings, everyone. On the warmest day we've had in a little while, here we are inside. Hopefully everyone's well. If you don't know me yet, I'm Allison Van Pelt, Sustainability Planner housed at Polk County Public Works and the lead staff for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant here in Central Iowa. If my team doesn't mind real quick, I will just give them a quick shout out. I could never do this alone. And so we have Cassie Drool, who's in our Water Resources Division helping out today, as well as my Green Iowa AmeriCorps members, Brett, Aaron, and Ava. And just a quick shout out to them. They are my professional flotation devices. And so if you see them in the wild, do give them a high five and tell them how great work they're doing. We can move on from there, I think. Do I have control? Okay. So like Catherine just said, if you could and haven't already, please go ahead and go into the rename your Zoom just with your name and organization, just trying to make sure that we keep good track of who is here for this call, who we've got input from on this call, and then who else we need to bring to the table and make sure that we follow up with later on as well. You can keep moving. All right, so what we're here to do, one is provide an overview of what is Next Central Iowa, releasing that officially today, and then going over what the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant is. You'll hear me say CPRG. I hope I only have to say those words for the next, or those letters for the next couple months, and then we can move on from that. But CPRG is our main aim. Two, we want feedback. So we have been listening to folks throughout the community and the whole region. And so we've put together a model, priority climate action measure that we could use as a proposal. And we'll get into breakout groups and go through that after I discuss it with you. And then moving into, okay, now that we have this model and kind of poking holes in that, there are other measures out there as well that could be in this priority climate action plan too. So breaking out in those groups. So we'll spend just a little bit of time with me talking at you. I'm sorry, I am a teacher part-time, so this is part of the gig, but then half of this time we'll spend really digging in to what you guys have feedback on. Next slide. So CPRG, a two-phase program administered by the US EPA. We are in phase 1 and phase 2 right now, which might confuse you, but we'll clear that up in a minute. Phase 1 is a planning grant. Phase 1 is what I was hired on to do. We have 4 years from this past August to do a planning grant. The state of Iowa did pass last spring on this opportunity, and so it was divvied up to the metropolitan areas, 3 of them in fact, Des Moines Metro being one, Cedar Rapids and Iowa City going in on another plan. Phase 2 is the implementation grant. This is a competitive process, right? Phase 1 was, hey, we would like to allot this money to you, not competitive. This phase 2 is competitive. There's roughly $4 billion in funding available, but it's only for phase 1 participants. So the state of Iowa is not applicable, and other entities that pass are not applicable for this money. So, you know, we kind of have a pretty good chance of getting in there. Just some of the overarching goals and objectives from the federal notice and the federal requirements for this. One is to understand and prioritize our greenhouse gas emissions, so GHGE. I love a good acronym. Another one is to collaborate with entities. This is a regional plan. We are not just doing it for Polk County, even though I'm housed here. This is a Polk story, Dallas, Warren, Jasper, Guthrie, Madison, and I think I got them all. So this is for everybody. We also want to leverage funding sources. We know that our local dollars are getting tighter, but we also know that there's tons of federal dollars, there's private dollars. So how can we leverage those and also stimulate innovation and then actually reduce some greenhouse gas emissions while supporting the clean economy, while supporting workforce development. And one of the pieces of a lot of the Biden administration rollouts has been this Justice 40, so benefiting those low income and disadvantaged communities, which might look a little bit different here. I think when people think of LIDAC, so low income and disadvantaged communities, that looks different in San Diego than it does here in Iowa. It looks different in New Orleans than it does here. And so, really looking at income levels, and then a lot of this has to do with our age statistics as well. Next slide. So the timeline, in the bottom right, you're gonna see, yes, you're reading this right, because a lot of the stuff at the very beginning is truncated really, really quickly. And so I was hired in August, and by the end of the next month, our whole work plan was kind of flipped upside down. We initially planned on doing a priority climate action plan due March 21st, but then that became the keystone and to getting implementation grant dollars as well. So that ramped that whole thing up. We added phase 2, and phase 2 will actually end before phase 1 is really moving along a little bit more smoothly. So one of the things to keep in mind here is that I did not try to make this the most rapid fire thing you've ever done in your life. I wish we had more time. And so that's why I'm sorry that it's going to be rapid fire, but luckily, we're all in this together. And so we're going to work with what we can do. Some things that don't fit into this priority climate action planning period will just kind of go onto the bike rack and say, hey, this is something that we will do over the long haul, that comprehensive climate action planning. So just keep that in mind, that if it's not a priority just for today where we can get something done in the next 6 months, that doesn't mean it flies away in the wind. We have that there. We'll continue to work on it through the comprehensive one. Next. Just a reminder, so our original planning area was Guthrie, Dallas, Polk, Jasper, Warren, and Madison counties. Because of the natural integration and communication and connections between Story County and our Des Moines Metro, we invited them along and they were happy to be here. I'm happy to have many from both Ames and Story County on the call. Next. So I mentioned that disadvantaged communities are pretty important to a lot of the Biden administration rollouts right now. And so this is just a pretty good snapshot of what that looks like here in central Iowa. So most of our urbanized or smaller towns have some, I don't know if you can see mine, but we have Perry in there, Ames, Nevada, much of the Des Moines Metro, maybe not so much in the Ankeny area, but you see Winterset, Indianola, Newton, and things like that popping up with some rural tracks as well. Again, a lot of this is influenced more by age than some of the other pieces, but we do know we have an aging population, and that's fine. We keep on working. Next slide. And just to kind of break that down one more time, planners, we love numbers, so I'm very sorry about this, but just looking at populations, population change, we've had a lot of change over central Iowa's last 10 years. Dallas County is booming, shrinking other places, small growth in some places, but really what we wanted to put out there was the percent of the population within our region within each county. I am a Polk County employee. 61% of who this grant could impact is within my county. However, there's another 40% out there that aren't within my county. And that means that, yes, I might work here, but really, 60-40, making sure that we are splitting our time, our resources, and communicating to these audiences, right? An audience here in Polk County might not resonate with something put out for Jasper County residents. And so just making sure that we are understanding the spectrum of residents throughout our region. Next. Okay, so if you've been following me at all, I have been running around like a crazy person sometimes, but with a lot of intent. One, in August, we started onboarding myself, learning a very large agency very quickly and all of the procedures there, but then hit the ground running by bringing on my team. So I have the 3 AmeriCorps members that are, again, my professional flotation devices, and every day I'm so thankful for them. And we dug right in. I think the first couple days I kind of blew them away and saying, hey, we have to go right now. Let's start. And so since August, September, and October, we have been reviewing all the regional local plans, looking at initiatives, reviewing programs, and then looking at what our requirements are for the planning grant that we're in now, as well as the notice of funding, so NOFO, notice of funding opportunity, that came out in September. We have surveyed the communities through a couple different outlets and sent out a Fun Santa survey to the public as well. There's still more of that to come. Right now we have the measure intake form open and ready as well if you have insights to share with us there, but this will continue to roll on. We are conducting greenhouse gas inventories. The Green Iowa AmeriCorps folks have been knee deep in these spreadsheets and actually dreaming of them lately, whether that's a nightmare or a happy dream, TBD. But we have those in the final stages, and it needs to go through the quality assurance planning process before that gets released. But soon you'll see that as well. I have some other numbers for you. Developing a website, again, final touches going on that. Once that's done, a lot of these things will be there, and that will be our centralized hub, not only for communities and agencies and things like that, but for when we get to our public outreach and things like that as well. So that will continue to evolve as we go. So then, taking all of this stuff, so we've talked and talked and talked, and on the right you can see who all I've talked to. 7 boards of supervisors, pretty much every regional entity that is out there that has many folks at it, metro managers, metro advisory, transportation, economic development, and then met with staff and leadership within other individual pockets of sectors, whether that be housing, health and human services. I'm a planner, I'm not an engineer, so always trying to understand engineering, finance and legal, as well as our local governments. They have a stake in that too, and so putting that all together. So as this all kind of came together, we synthesized all these discussions, all this data, all these NOFO requirements, and then the emerging priorities that came out of our discussions and things, and put together kind of a framework for Central Iowa to move forward on as we near our PCAP. And so that ended up developing a couple model measures, which you can go to the next slide. So before we get into the model measures, I wanted to put a greenhouse gas inventory in front of you. This is, just keep in mind, this is for the Des Moines metro communities right now. Again, I wanted to run our CPRG one through its quality assurance process before putting that out publicly. This has been quality assured. And so just an idea of what does this inventory look like? And so in 2019 here in the Des Moines metro, about 26% of our emissions came from transportation and other mobile sources, 29% came from commercial energy, and 23.5% came from residential energy. One of the reasons I bring this up is because as we get into both the PCAP and CCAP, really looking at what of these sectors we really want to be targeting is very important. Transportation, mobile services have a large influx of carbon reduction and national EV infrastructure and resilient, and there's protect, and there's all sorts of different acronyms out there for funding sources through that. So, transportation might be really high, but in this priority phase has kind of bumped a little bit lower because there are so many funding streams coming into it. Commercial, the highest, is also just a larger we'll say it's not actually a beast, but a larger beast. It's something that, you know, we can't necessarily tackle in just a short 4 or 6 month period, that we need that runway of the next 2 years. And so commercial could have an impact here. There will definitely be economic benefits in putting the commercial sector to work. However, we're really not focusing in on that commercial building energy at this time. And you'll see that we focus more on the residential. And on the next slide, you'll see why. So we have talked and talked and talked and listened and talked and listened and listened and listened. And these are just some of the things that have come up, even some of the intake forms that some of you have submitted in the last couple of days. Rooftop solar, community solar, emphasis on low-income disadvantaged communities in that space comes up quite often. Many of our more rural counties have talked about, hey, what does row crop productions impact here? What are the barriers for us? Are we carbon positive? Are we carbon negative? Are we neutral? You know, what is our impact? And how can we either A, be better, or B, you know, continue to be a positive impact? A lot of people are looking at EVs. There's tons of different rebates and things like that out there. You know, one thing that kept coming up is just the need for greenhouse gas inventories and the need for staff or tools to complete them. And so throughout this process, in the CCAP, we're doing this county level data, but throughout the comprehensive planning process, we're really going to be honing in on, if a community wants a greenhouse gas inventory, how can we give that to them? And hopefully that's a little bit through our staff. Hopefully it's a little bit through training, but also providing tools. Grant writing, rural recycling and composting, light rails, and even trolleys has come up. And of course, really steadfast programs that are already out there and just expanding on them. Maybe an energy efficiency or weatherization program might just need a little bit more bolster to help hit more households, which is perfectly fine. I love the idea, it's come up a couple times lately, is how can we utilize our utility bills as a financing option? So it's not taking out a loan from somewhere else, it's, you know, leveraging into our energy bills and things like that, which is not necessarily a forte of mine, but I love the idea, and I think that there are discussions around that. And then when you get to the bottom, some people say, you know what, I'm pretty good. I don't need any of these things. Thanks, but no thanks. And I think that, you know, it would be naive for me to say as a regional planner that people won't say that. We are not saying Central Iowa needs to do X, Y, Z. That's why you'll see our tagline is, what is next, Central Iowa? We are asking the question, what do people want to do? And if their answer is nothing, then we can make caveats for action and impacts in different ways. So I believe you get to stop listening to me for just a second as Catherine talks about how we translate some of these ideas into the measures you'll hear later.
Thanks, Allison. And I realized that I did not get a chance to introduce myself, so I'm going to take a moment to do that. My name is Catherine Kemp. I'm with the Great Plains Institute, and I've got some members, some of my colleagues here too, Lola, Amy, and Sydney, and Trisha should be joining later. And we're super grateful to be working with Allison and her team to support the development of the Priority Climate Action Plan through this EPA program. So some of you may be familiar, you know, with other sustainability plans or climate action plans that include, you know, long, comprehensive set of actions covering all emission sectors, talking about resilience. So the Priority Climate Action Plan that the EPA is funding is not that. It's not meant to include everything under the sun, not meant to be a laundry list of potential actions, but EPA is really asking for very detailed information about a set of priority measures, is the term that we're using. So I think, as Allison alluded to, for phase 2 of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, eligible applicants can apply for funds to implement the measures that are outlined in the PCAP, for the Priority Climate Action Plan. So due to that really short timeline that Allison outlined earlier, we are discussing concepts today that would be included in both the PCAP and in the implementation grant proposal. So just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. Talking about a discrete set of measures to include in the Priority Climate Action Plan, and further down the line later this year, there will be a chance to inform the more comprehensive Climate Action Plan. So want to go through what's in a measure. And so Sydney put a link in the chat to this measure intake form that some of you already have filled out. And you have a couple more days to fill that out. So thank you for submitting it if you already did. Well, we're going to have time in breakout groups later on to discuss ideas for the PCAP and the implementation grants, but we just want to make sure you kind of have an idea of what the EPA is really asking for, so that if you have ideas that you want Polk County to include in the PCAP or in the implementation grant, really providing the information on this list will help us, make sure that we're providing sufficient detail. So, of course, you need like a short description of the measure, the idea. You need to identify what sector it relates to, what's the geographic scope, what's the greenhouse gas emissions reduction impact, how will the idea be implemented, who should be implementing it, is the idea from an existing plan, or do you have good examples of where it's been implemented somewhere else? And this is really referring to the idea that EPA doesn't want some like pie in the sky ideas, but rather something that, folks have discussed and decided would be a good idea for an area, or, have seen it tested elsewhere. The next thing is we need to know if there's been other funding that's been pursued to implement this idea, because basically EPA wants to fund projects that otherwise would not be funded. And then lastly, being able to outline the staffing and funding needs. So as I said, it's kind of a lot of information. And so Allison's going to walk through an example of what this might look like. And so this kind of example measure, or this model measure, is based on an idea that the county is considering including in the Priority Climate Action Plan. So hand it back to you, Allison.
Thank you. Okay. So again, based on all the things we heard last fall and into winter and just into these last couple frigid weeks, we have put together a measure example with the working title Home Suites. Now I recognize Home Suites kind of sounds like a hotel. That's probably because Homewood Suites is a hotel. And so this is a working title. It's something to slap up there. But really what we're thinking is that there could be a program that offers no-cost energy audits to participants that looks to expand on energy efficiency programs, reduce our energy bills, increase electric capacity for homes as we kind of start to think about electric vehicles or solar panels or what have you, electric appliances, making sure our homes and our neighborhoods and our transmission lines can handle that. And of course, improving resiliency and cooling our neighborhoods. We know that the derecho ripped out quite a few of our trees in central Iowa. And so it could be just as simple as replacing some of those. And so, as Catherine mentioned, there's all these kind of questions. So one of the next questions is, what sectors would it be reduced? So really focusing on that residential building piece, but then there's these beneficial factors, including electricity generation and our natural and working lands and more, that really are areas that we are touching at the same time while focusing in that residential energy building energies. Geographic scope, the whole region. So all the counties that I mentioned before would be applicable to this. You can go to the next one. So just thinking through, okay, what kind of potential offerings could be put into this? And so I want to start off by saying this is not the end all be all. This is not an official list. These are best practices from the field. However, these are also things we've heard from you all and your constituents that, hey, I would like to do this or that. And so really trying to create an offering list that anybody could have some sort of interest in something on there. If they are told, hey, this is how you could reduce your impact, there's something that they might like, whether it is a little bit more intense, less intense, what have you. And so at the top, we put them in 3 buckets. One, energy efficiency. So it could be that insulation, those windows, the smart thermostats, things like that, things that some of our weatherization programs or some of our energy efficiency programs are already kind of hitting, and just bolstering those, making sure that we're able to fulfill the needs of the request list that they are getting. 2 is the renewables and electrification. So again, upgrading those panels. If you want to have 2 electric vehicles, do you have and I'm not an electrician, I'm going to use this word, conduit that runs out to your garage to fulfill that need? Looking at those upgrades, looking at solar tubes, very easy, just, creating solar tubes to bring in natural light into our buildings. And it could be small scale renewables. And the ecosystem services, really bringing back native trees and shrubs. I think that we heard quite a bit from communities that, hey, we lost so much. Our homes are heating up quicker because we lost, in a lot of cases, all of our maples or, things like that. And so looking at what native trees and shrubs can we bring back into the landscape to replace that have both a carbon sequestration benefit, but also can start providing that shade and bringing down the energy use. And then in the more rural areas, agroforestry, those windbreaks, maybe even it's a crop producing agroforestry practice or something like that. They didn't get just bypassed by the derecho. They have a stake in this as well. And then, of course, I think it would be remiss in Iowa if we didn't say, hey, where do cover crops or soil health or our agricultural pieces come into this? And so making sure we have something on the spectrum for everyone. Go ahead. So one of the main things about this grant is you really have to look around and say, hey, what else is going on in this space? Not only the work, but also what funding is already out there. And so this is not an all-inclusive list by any means, but when we are looking around to say, hey, where are these gaps? What are our opportunities? We did look at things like community development block grants. Do many cities have the capacity needed to prepare and execute these federal grants that have high reporting standards? And if not, what agencies can we support? How can we make sure that they do? Or how can we build off of rebates? Right now, rebates means you pay up front, you wait to get paid back. Those are very much less accessible for a low income and what we call ALICE, so asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So those folks that have jobs that are working every day, do not necessarily fit into the low income, but they're also not marching up the economic ladder. They're just kind of at this kind of cliff effect place. So how can we make sure that these pieces are more accessible for the folks who might need them the most and not just those who can't afford them? And there's also really great efficiency and weatherization programs that I won't go into too much more right now, but they have been very popular before. People love free trees or cheap trees. We love our trees here. We want more energy efficient things. We want these things naturally because our bills are affected by them. But in some cases, there might be a funding stream that's capped. Maybe there's not enough technical staff to do something. Maybe, it's an income cap. So 200% of the federal poverty level is anything from 30 to 60,000 within a single household to household of 4. So what is that impact on it? Or maybe in the weatherization, we've heard, hey, there's not enough contractors to even do this work. And so how do we fulfill these needs? And so a lot of these things and more, transportation, solar for all, a lot of these things were considered. This is just a brief list to kind of show, hey, all of these things are taken into consideration, and that's why this model concept was put together for you all. Again, not the end all be all, but stuff to think about as you continue to submit measures to us. You can go to the next one. So one of the things that we like to do in the Water Resources Division is really figure out how does something roll out, especially if we're working across 7 regions and there's all these tinier pieces. And so we came up with this 5-stage approach. One is to gain interest. We still have about 18 months on the larger phase 1 of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. You saw our logo. We are making videos, we're making a website, we're tabling, we are reaching out to do all sorts of creative outreach, not only in the Des Moines Metro, but throughout central Iowa. And so having that centralized marketing available to folks to then localize into their methods and venues, and then help people be the messenger. I am not the messenger to everyone. Not everyone wants to hear from me. I can tell you, maybe even not all of you want to hear from me, and that's fine. I think that everybody has a stake in this game, and so having multiple messengers and multiple avenues to get the interest gained is a great opportunity. The second would become eligible. So a no-cost home audit with efficiency and capacity. We already know that there's multiple agencies that have efficiency audits already kind of standardized, and some come straight from the state. Capacity is less standardized, and so looking at, hey, how can we take that state audit and add on to it if everybody's already using this thing. And then from there, once that's done, have a curation of audit results saying, hey, here's an offer list for you, moving into stage 3, and you get to choose what you want to do from here. We are not going to dictate to you what you need to do. Here is by cost and by impact, what might be beneficial for you and your household. And then set a delivery and participant cost expectation. I think that this will continue to be refined as stage 4 is refined as well, but really trying to tell people on the day where you have an audit done, this is what you could do. And this is how we can help make it easier. Because I think in a lot of cases, if there's little hiccups and hurdles, people really kind of, and I do it too. But if there's a bunch of hiccups, I'm really busy. I have a ton of other stuff to do. That hiccup just tossed me off from even pursuing this path. And so really bringing those down. So delivery could be anything from rebates and coupons. In the Water Resources Department, we've had a really great success in this batch and build. Habitat for Humanity does similar in their Rock the Block. And there's lots of different programs that do it. But say, hey, we are going to target on these neighborhoods and say, hey, if you can get your audit done by a certain date and you sign up and choose XYZ practice, we'll come do the whole thing in one fell swoop across your neighborhood or street or community or something like that. And then, of course, the dream of mine has always been to make sure that we have a low income and disadvantaged community fund to make sure that rebates and coupons and this batch and build and all these delivery systems are not inaccessible to those who don't have the money up front. And so there's, I think, lots of ways we can partner on something like that and utilize and leverage some of the funds we already have. Outcomes, the outcomes that the grant asks for: reduce emissions, reduce cost burdens on our energy bills, create good jobs, build more impact at the household level. There are more than 350,000 homes within this region. Having impacts at those household levels will literally send out ripples in every other direction. You can move on. So just thinking about, again, just trying to think about the whole picture here. How are we going to do it? Who is carrying what out? What are the roles and responsibilities? So again, this is just a template, and we'll start at the left. So Polk County Public Works, we could be the implementation, grant application and reporting mechanism. We would be the overall program coordination and convening, and we would be the originators of all the pass-through grants that could go to agencies like housing trust funds or community action partnerships or other nonprofits that help move these programs along and put them into the community. So looking at the second column, housing trust funds, if that was chosen as an outlet for this, that they would implement the grant subrecipients, localized program offerings, and have local administration and reporting requirements put on them. When I say localization of program offerings, on the screen, a couple screens before, we kind of came up with all these buckets of what people could do. And again, what is good for Polk County might not be good for Jasper or Guthrie. And so making sure that, hey, here's the whole toolbox. If Madison County wants to do XYZ things, that's their offering, right? We're not going to make everybody do what we say. We're going to say, hey, here is the slate of things that we could put into a program. Now you take this and create a local program that benefits your community. I don't live in Madison County or Guthrie County. I'm happy to help, but really that local knowledge is so important. So in the middle, we get into our private and nonprofit partners. So I have a major twitch about pilot programs that end. Oh, you should hear me. Sometimes it just rattles me how often we have these great programs stood up and then that funding cycle ended. And so really, we'd really like to look at how can we sustain and create a perpetual program, because there's no way we can hit all 350,000 homes within a 4 or 5 year period. How can we make sure that this lives beyond just this grant? What organizations can we work with to create more education or workforce development opportunities? And I would say selfishly for phase 2 or for phase 1 and the final carrying of that out, how can our private and nonprofit partners help in the public input? Either getting us direct connections, actually being a messenger, what have you. There are opportunities for us to say in this grant, hey, we want to work with XYZ organizations on really connecting with this community. We would pass through XYZ dollars to them to carry that out. These are options within this grant. And the 2 columns on the right, program participants, it's a free audit, really nothing too much there. They get to select it. Let the market decide. Let the people decide. They want something, let them have it. And then really at the end, we want those home upgrades. We want the reduced energy bill, because if there's a reduced energy bill, it means there's a reduced energy demand, which means that our greenhouse gases go down. And I think very much we are lucky here in Central Iowa that we do have such a large renewable portfolio that if we can really work on our efficiencies, our renewables will continue to go farther in their use. And so really focusing on that. So in Iowa, all Central Iowa's really looking at something that's accessible and concerted action, right? We want everybody to be able to do something to reduce their energy burdens or to increase their access to efficiency technologies and things like that, or get a better job within this workforce. But at the end of the day, we know that these storms and things like that keep coming. So how can we continue to create resilience within our region in the face of these extreme weather events as they roll up? And lastly, I think you'll stop hearing from me soon. So pulling it all together, right? So there's all this information, there's all these programs, there's so many things we could do. Really, seriously, so many things. So how do we kind of pull this together? Well, one is the cost consideration, and one thing to look at is within the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO, for phase 2, there is a table. Table number 1, probably table number 1 for a reason. It is the grant ranges and the funding by tier. So this is what the EPA has kind of put out as their matrix of, hey, this is what we're expecting within these dollar brackets. This is how many awards we're expecting to put out. I would say, because the state of Iowa passed, that we as a 800,000 person metro would probably want to aim for tier D, which is the second from the bottom, 10,000 to $49,999,999. There's roughly about 6 to 30 of these out. And I think if we structure this pretty well, that's about where we would want to sit. Other ideas could knock us up or bring us a little bit further down, but that's the one that we kind of came up with as an assumption that we would kind of target for. And so you'll see below here, we think that, okay, if we need on the right staff for management, coordination, legal, financial, communications, and we need full-time employees at county level agencies that we create pass-through to, or private nonprofits and things like that. We would need to add at least 20-ish people, plus likely AmeriCorps, professional flotation devices, and other workforce and apprenticeship programs to this, to create kind of this nest of people ready to service this program. Outside of that, even, we have contractors and outside vendors to consider as well in this staffing. And so I think that there's great opportunity to work with other education institutions continuing this forward. So I have asked a number of different agencies for matrix of their salaries and stuff like that. I'm so appreciative of all those who let me kind of poke through and randomize some of the things that we did. But when I kind of put in rough numbers for stuff like this, came out with raises included and fringe, a high level fringe, just to be safe, at about $15 million for the 5 years for staffing. That would leave, if we went to the top of that cap, about $35 million for the program services itself. And I think because of the structure of the grant and the infrastructure bill itself, we could aim for, hey, 40% of this would be in our low income disadvantaged communities. And we would try to fully fund those where possible. Now that is a goal. Again, I have missed goals all the time. I used to play soccer, not the greatest, but I miss goals all the time. But this would be a goal that we could set for ourselves. And I think one of the other things we've been really successful with in Central Iowa is looking for potential public-private partnerships to leverage funding. If we say, hey, we have all this federal funding that can do X, Y, Z, and we have private funders that are like, hey, I would like to get into that, or this philanthropy, we've been looking for a way to incorporate sustainability or energy efficiency or what have you into our philanthropy. This would be a great way to start leveraging some of that and then starting to perpetuate the program past just a pilot once this implementation grant is done. So you have heard me talk for a while. We'll go to the next slide, which is one word and a question mark. We would like to take any questions at the high level. We'll really get into some of the more nitty gritty a little bit later on in our breakout questions. But if you have high level questions, I'll turn it over to Catherine to kind of moderate and take those as they come.
Thanks, Allison. Yes, so we have about 5 minutes that we're gonna reserve for really like clarifying questions. So if you've got questions about CPRG, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, if you have questions about the concept that Allison just laid out, really just anything that will equip us for our breakout room session. And then we'll ask that you save the others for the end. So we'll have time for questions later, and Allison and I are gonna stick around after the call. So just the most important stuff right now so we can get into our discussions. I see some raised hands. Susan, go ahead. Susan, if you're talking, I can't hear you. Still not hearing you, unless other people are, and it's just me. Might be some audio issues, Susan, on your end, because we're not hearing you. If you don't mind, I might switch over to Katie, and then maybe we can come back to you if you're able to sort out the audio. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious, is it possible for like the city of Des Moines or Polk County to have a local green bank to help leverage some of the funding that we could obtain through this?
So, great question. It's something I'm actually meeting with the EPA on Wednesday about, is how could we bank some, how can some of this money be flexed in maybe ways that typical funding pots aren't? So I'll add green bank specifically to my list of questions, but I don't have an answer yet. But if possible, that would be ideal. And I'm meeting with grant people, I believe, Wednesday morning, so I can get answers back to you.
Question. I see Jeremy in the chat seconds the green bank. Susan, any luck with your audio? Still not hearing you if you're trying to talk. So if you want to, you could put a question in the chat, or we can revisit that later. Maybe in the breakout room, you will be able to ask your question. Other clarifying questions that folks have?
Yeah, this is Jeremy Karen with the city of Des Moines. A couple slides back, we talked about having as much access to similar to like the green bank or external funding opportunities, but thinking about how are we capturing and organizing like stacking of funding with this. So we certainly would get the CPRG implementation funding. How are we thinking about combining that even with other funding resources and getting more bang for our buck?
So there, with federal dollars, there's pretty strict rules on how you can stack things. In a lot of cases, you can't just stack a whole bunch of federal stuff on itself. And so it actually is on my list of, since CPRG is a little bit more flexible in this way, again, with the grants office, can this be stacked? Can it be leveraged and put up against something else? So far, what I've been hearing is not likely pushing the needle too far in that vein. However, there could be ways to flex that and lean it up against things, but typically federal on top of federal on top of federal just has a lot of strings. But it is, again, on my list of things to talk to with the EPA about, and I can follow up with both you and Katie, and so we can put this in a newsletter to go out next week with any follow-up.
Thanks.
All right, okay, looks like Susan is actually Joel.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. I
That's
think I
okay.
clicked on Susan's link, so I'm showing up as Susan here, but Joel's at City of Ames. I had a question on the Home Suites program, which is just in terms of how it would be implemented. I wanted to clarify that you thought that you would hire or participants would be able to select, and then energy auditors would be reimbursed through that. And then just at that scale, are you working or talking to like national implementers? But I don't know if we have that capacity within Iowa in recent years to be able to stand up as quickly as you want to get going with things.
Yeah, and I think that's a great discussion to have continued in the breakout group as well. So I have not come up with every answer to every piece of all of these things because, yeah, I don't implement these things. What we do know is that there is interest for these to be more effective, more available. And so, yeah, I think that that is a discussion. I don't know of any national people, but as you go into your breakout group, I think that's a great thing to kind of noodle on and say, hey, these are other pieces. Because yeah, all one brain can't come up with all this. And so, yeah, continue to put that stuff together because that's things that we can noodle on over the next couple months, work towards in smaller group discussions. And also in the application itself, it has rooms for assumptions. Hey, we are assuming that we can't fill this capacity just within, our localized workforce. So we might have to reach out nationally in this space. And so that's something that we can bake in, but that's not a determinant that necessarily I put forward here. I would very much like, the Joels and the people that are putting some of these things on the ground to have that input and provide that and lead that decision making, since I am just one person with a whole bunch of professional flotators by me. But that's that's a great addition. And I think that that's one of the things, that these breakout rooms are very much going to be pulling out is what holes do you see in it? What do we still need to add to it? What don't you like? What do you like? What would you like to change? Because, this is just an idea based on what everybody has put forward so far. How do we make it applicable? How do we make it actionable? That very much has to do with you all rather than me. And so that's what a great space for these breakout rooms.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joel. And I see Bob had a comment in the chat saying that the Iowa Energy Fund was organized to work with various entities to leverage greenhouse gas reduction funds. So Bob, I would encourage you to bring that up in your breakout group as well when we talk about, how can different organizations and existing work complement this proposal. And it sounds like we can help answer that idea of how to braid and stack different federal resources. So I'm not seeing other hands. So let's move into our breakout groups. So our current plan, I think we have just enough time to do this. We will have 30 minutes to talk through that home suite concept, and we've got some discussion questions to guide us there. We'll spend 30 minutes talking about additional measures, other ideas that you think should be included in the priority climate action plan. And we'll have a little bit of time for a wrap up at the end. So again, Allison kind of alluded to some of this, but what we're looking for is what's your initial reaction to the proposal? What are some of the gaps? What are opportunities? What's the existing work that this can complement or leverage? How can we ensure access to these services in disadvantaged communities? As Allison said, this is a really big priority of EPA. Number 4, do you see a role for your organization in implementing this? And then who's not at the table? Who needs to be part of future conversations about this concept? And then for the additional measure brainstorming, again, we want to hear ideas for other projects that should be included in the plan. But like we were saying earlier, with such a short timeline and limited staff capacity, we're going to need your help to really dig into the details on what those measures should be. There's a certain amount of analysis that EPA is requiring. So we'll talk through some of those specific pieces of information that would be needed. And I wanted to offer one other list to kind of keep in the back of your mind when you're thinking of different measures to propose. So these are the scoring criteria from the EPA for how they're going to score the implementation grant proposal. So we want to be thinking about the magnitude of emissions reductions, both in the near term and the long term. We want to be thinking about cost-effective measures. We want to be thinking about measures that are going to have transformative impact. Again, measures that would engage and benefit lower income and disadvantaged communities, reduction of pollutants that cause smog and particle pollution, and then finally, measures with specific implementation strategies and metrics that allow us to measure performance. So keep those in the back of your head when you're thinking about what to propose in terms of additional measures. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and move into our breakouts. So in your Zoom menu, you should be able to select breakout rooms at the bottom or wherever your menu is, and you'll have 3 options. So room 1 is where we're thinking of putting folks who might be involved in implementing this home suites concept. So the housing trust funds, weatherization agencies, housing developers, philanthropy, and we're also going to think we might have some folks from different utilities on there. So folks who maybe have their own energy efficiency programs, we're going to put you all in room 1. In room 2, we're going to have local government representatives, so the cities and counties, other local government representatives on the line. And then room 3, we're going to have everyone else. So that should be a great conversation with diverse organizations in there. So if you have any issues joining one of those breakouts, please, you can stay in this room and Sydney will help allocate you to the right room. We'll be in here for about an hour and then we will come back to the large group. So we're going to put the questions in the chat so that you can have those for reference, and then we will, look forward to seeing you in the breakout rooms. All right, how are those conversations, everyone? Good? Thumbs up? We had really great conversation in our local government breakout room. Facilitators, how do we feel about doing just a 1-minute report out from your conversation? That sound good? I can go first. We had some good representation from communities, cities and counties. We talked about some existing residential retrofit projects or programs, one that City of Ames has, and Des Moines has a program as well. There's some similarities. We've heard about a program in Dallas County. So there's a lot of existing work that could be leveraged or complemented for sure with the home suites concept. What else did we talk about? Talked about one of the main barriers being you getting from like having an audit to folks actually acting on it. So, pointed out the importance of having someone to provide that hand-holding step to bring folks from that audit step to connecting with the financing and contractors and all those pieces, because it's hard to act on those by yourself. We did talk about some additional ideas for measures to include in the priority climate action plan. One was around electrification of transit vehicles, both in urban and rural areas. Talked a little about fleet electrification, and talked about community solar as well. So have had some great conversations and already have a few follow-ups that we want to have, and appreciate everyone's participation in our group. Lola, would you mind sharing about your conversation?
Sure. Our group was lenders and implementers of programs, different types of residential conservation programs and utilities. And we also had a great conversation, lots of richness of work already being done or being stood up. And I would say identified a couple of needs that like didn't exactly show up on the slides. One was a shortage of energy auditors and in Iowa, and a real need for a training component to this program to be actually able to implement it. And then a need for like a financial counselor or handholder, because for every household, depending on income level, there would be a slightly different financing stack. And with programs that are being stood up in Iowa already or existing, and some thoughts of existing programs that might be able to fit into that role, an energy navigator program that's starting up. And then again, a couple of ideas going forward. One was electric vehicle charging for multifamily buildings, and the other one was around zero energy homes and what local governments could do to encourage that and train contractors, and kind of looking ahead at new construction.
Amy.
Yeah, our group hit on some things that already were mentioned. We kind of, right off the bat, continued conversation around green banks within our smaller group, and just creating some incentives and having an established program to support the implementation. We also talked about, I guess, like education accessibility of just ensuring, kind of, Catherine, what your group talked about, that handholding and supporting the consumers through the process and of understanding how this program works and how the funding works, and just dedicating time and resources to that specifically. What else did we talk about? We discussed the batch and build kind of framework and how that has worked in other programs, and would like to continue using or supporting that kind of framework. Some additional measure ideas were also community solar, specifically behind the meter community solar, and discussion of Brightfield's community solar. And then we also discussed roadside vegetation as another kind of, I guess, like low-hanging fruit energy efficiency measure. Yeah, I think those were I think that's what we discussed.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. I know that we could have talked for even longer, but appreciate the time that you devoted today to these conversations. In our remaining minutes, we'll go through some next steps. We will share a couple of links in the chat, and we'll send it out by email as well. The first is a post-meeting survey, and that is really just to indicate your interest in future conversations on refining proposals. And we also want to know if you're interested or able to help with some more on-the-ground community engagement with residents, community-based organizations. And then the second form is that measure intake form that you received in your invitation, and we've put it in the chat a couple of times today. And, you know, maybe there's some new ideas that came up from the conversations or hearing about the criteria that EPA is prioritizing. Would love to hear your ideas submitted through that form as well. Both of these are going to be due on Wednesday. So, you know, fill out that post-meeting survey right now if you'd like to. We'd appreciate hearing from you there. Allison, you want to go through our action items?
Yeah. So I'll say that one of my action items right in this moment is a little bit of gratitude. Gratitude for all of you for taking 2 hours of your Monday afternoon to come tussle through this. This is large. It's a large area. They're large topics. There's lots of ideas. So I'm grateful for all of you, your brains, your bodies, and all that stuff. Other things we'll be doing. So Catherine and I are going to stay online for a little bit longer. If people have questions that are just still burning, they want to hash out, we'll be online here for a couple more minutes. By February 1st, we are asked to submit our notice of intent to apply for the implementation grant. It is a very broad, general, hey, EPA, you should hire someone to review our application, because the EPA, if you could guess, they're a little understaffed and over giving right now. And so this is their way to kind of say, okay, we're going to need this many people to review. So we'll be submitting that very general, just, hey, the Central Iowa plans on applying, period. Priority Climate Action Plan is coming up due March 1st. So that's just a couple, like 40 days away. And then our implementation grant proposal is due April 1st. Between now and then, it is likely, especially after we get feedback from this survey and intake forms, that we will continue to have likely a little bit smaller rapid fire stuff and discussions and things like that. So keep an eye out for that. But we're aiming for those February, March, April 1st due dates. And then, as I mentioned before, this is a 2-year process, really, right? Like the EPA just tossed a big pot of money right at the beginning of it, but we really have 2 years to some of these things to hash out some of these larger pieces. And so stay tuned for that. If you're interested in incorporating our work into what you guys are doing this year, please, by all means, get a hold of us. But again, gratitude to all of you for participating in this. It's a lot to hold 2 hours on your schedule. It's a lot to hold your attention for 2 hours. So we appreciate your input. Please know that it is very much taken to heart, and we will try to incorporate it as best we can as we keep moving forward, and we'll keep you all posted. With that, Catherine, Lola, team, did I miss anything? I think, all right. Well, so a couple of us will stay on if anybody needs anything. However, you all are adjourned, and we will send out a follow-up email with some of these links and stuff like that as the day keeps rolling on. So appreciate your time. Take good care, everybody.